Good morning, everybody. We are back. And this time, so we're still reading Beyond Illusion and Doubt, I guess. Well, no, I'm going to leave this on because my mic is clipped on it. I was chilly. So we're still going to read this Beyond Illusion and Doubt, but we thought we're...
I'm probably going to start releasing them both every week, Monday and
Okay.
Fridays, so they'll still get to see here Beyond Illusion and Doubt until we're done with it.
Yeah, because we'll be able to be finished with that before too long. So we were also wanting to start. It's called Quest for Justice, and it's a few short stories from the Mahabharata, and it's a book that's put together by His Divine Grace. Gosvami, aka Howard Resnick. He's been a devotee. He's been a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, and he's been a practitioner of Bhakti-Yoga for like 50 years. And
he's quite a scholar as far as Sanskrit and stuff too, so he can translate.
Harvard University. I mean, he's a very, very well-studied person. So he put together this book of short stories. So I was going to read the back, and we can dive into it. We eventually want to actually read the Mahabharata, so we thought this would be a nice little segue into it. The Mahabharata is one of the world's most significant historical epics. At a staggering 100,000 verses, or stanzas, this massive work reveals a highly complex ancient civilization, one that not only excelled in the arts, sciences, and philosophy, but that also embodied the highest ideals of justice, morality, and spiritual understanding. Romance, tyranny, war, and the supreme enlightenment all are described in this riveting, divinely inspired narrative, which has profoundly influenced South Asian culture and spirituality for thousands of years. Quest for Justice is based upon a collection of lectures on various themes and episodes from the Mahabharata. Paralleling the magnetic oral style of the epic itself, the book transmits these ancient narratives in an appealing, highly accessible, and engaging contemporary voice. Delivered with frequent good humor, the talks are easy and entertaining, even as they clearly confront the deepest meaning of the text. Oh man, I'm already getting excited. Indeed, I've never actually read this, so I'm pretty pumped. And I've read the Mahabharata many times, so yeah. Indeed, H.D. Gosvami skillfully depicts the psychological depth of the characters and the existential dilemmas they face in a strikingly vivid and immediate way. With his trademark wit, erudition, and insightful analysis, Goswami breathes new life into the most compelling episodes of this ancient literary masterpiece. Yep, and then, he received his PhD in Sanskrit and Indian Studies from Harvard University. He's a G.
Tap your
G
volume
God,
button
not
up.
Gangsta. No, I don't mean he's a god, but godly.
Tap your up button on the side. Not. Don't stop your recording. Just the volume. Tap it up a couple. I think we switched mics again, and I always have mine set up lower.
Nope.
And you speak softer. I just want to make sure it's full bars. All right.
Okay. All right. So we will start with. I guess I'll start with setting the stage. I'll read for a little bit, and then I'll pass it off, and we'll.
Okay.
I should buy a copy of this. All right. Setting the stage. Thousands of years ago, according to ancient sources, a series of extraordinary events took place that transformed our world both culturally and spiritually, and carried consequences that stretched far beyond this planet. Indeed, these events were so singular and powerful that great brahmanas described them to their students, parents, taught them to their children, and wandering sages, bards, traveled from village to village narrating what had happened, thus passing from one generation to another. These narrations were eventually preserved as text and remain accessible even today, known as the Mahabharata. It is this Mahabharata that will be the focus of our attention twice a day for the next week. I'm assuming this is from one of the lectures where he does these where he gives talks at colleges and stuff about it. We can start by exploring the Sanskrit term avatara. All spiritual paths begin with the assumption that the world as ordinarily perceived is not the highest truth. They begin by assuming that there are profound, inconceivable, wonderful truths about the universe, and things beyond that which can only be understood in higher states of consciousness. In this way, spiritual paths lead upward, and thus the avatara is one who crosses down. Sometimes it is God himself, and sometimes it is a very great soul, like Jesus, or, somebody like Prabhupada,
Yeah.
coming to, save people. But the avatara always descends from that higher plane to ours, bringing guidance, strength, light, and restoration. The suffix tara, crossing. Okay, so tara in the word means crossing. In avatara comes from the same Sanskrit root as the word tirtha, which means sacred place of pilgrimage, a place one commonly visits for spiritual inspiration and renewal. The idea is that when either God or a highly elevated soul crosses down to our world, wherever that avatara lands, or lives, or performs activities, becomes a place of pilgrimage, or a tirtha. This is because the avatara opens a channel between our world and that higher plane. Thus, while visiting a holy place, we can, in a sense, ascend, experience the divine through that same channel. Wow, that's very powerful. This explains why holy places are called tirthas, as well as the linguistic connection between tirtha and avatara. And that goes for all religions, whether it's, whatever. It's funny how that is a common theme across all of them. Now, according to the Mahabharata, it was no ordinary avatara that descended to our plane thousands of years ago. It was actually the avatari, which means the source of all avatars. When, for example, this avatari briefly spoke to Arjuna, his teachings became the Bhagavad Gita, perhaps the greatest spiritual work to come out of the East, and certainly one of the most famous texts in the world. Of course, that avatari, that speaker of the Gita, is Krishna. In fact, Krishna's descent to this world was so significant that another avatara, Bhagavan Vyas, came down simply to record what was happening. So yeah, Krishna also, descended as Vyasadeva, and because, who better to have record what was happening than someone who was completely perfect?
Yeah.
Here, I just wanted to. So he does this very, at the bottom of the page, he's got his little bibliography notes. So in regards to the name Krishna, he has a note here. It says, Krishna is the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita. His name literally means the all-attractive person. In the Mahabharata, the Srimad Bhagavatam, and other Sanskrit works, Krishna is understood to be the chief and most intimate name for the supreme monotheistic Godhead, the original cause of all causes. So that's why we choose to call him Krishna instead of God or whatever. It just means the all-attractive person, which is the perfect, like you said, the perfect name for God. We just choose to use the Sanskrit name for him.
Yeah.
Okay, back to... In fact, Krishna's descent to this world, was so significant that another avatara, Bhagavan Vyas, came down simply to record what was happening. Veda Vyas, as he's also known, is extremely famous within Indian civilization as the author of both the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Purana. He has also divided and organized all of the Vedas for the present age, and personally participated in the events he described. In other words, he was not only the observer, the witness, and the documenter. He was integrally involved in his own narrative, and the story he told of those immortal events was called the Mahabharata. The Sanskrit word maha means great. From this, by the way, we have the well-known Latin word magna, as in magnify or magnificent. So Magna Bharata, or Mahabharata, is the ancient name of India, but not necessarily the India of today. Today's India is a modern political invention, whereas the principal region in which the Mahabharata's events took place stretches from Afghanistan in the west all the way to Bengal, or perhaps even to Burma in the east. Yeah, there's temples in, the jungles of Vietnam and stuff that are like, Thailand, whatever, they're heavily influenced by India.
Yeah.
So this narrative took place over a vast area known as Bharat. And to this day, India bears that name, especially among members of the Indian population. Let's now turn to the text itself. What is the Mahabharata? When, where, and how was it composed? And how did it come down to us today? That is a whole story in itself. The Mahabharata is the largest of a genre of literature known as the Itihasa, which is generally translated as history. It is actually formed of three distinct words, iti, ha, and asa. Thus, it happened in the past. Wow, very literal. Thus, it happened in the past. So the Mahabharata is considered an actual history, but there is also a history of the epic itself, since it originated prior to the time of the written word, and then in quotation, despite some very popular Hindu tales to the contrary. In any case, we do know that the text has an untraceably long oral tradition, that at certain points it was written down, and that it has always been widely popular. In fact, to this day, when you're talking to scholars about South Asia and mention the great epic, they immediately know that you mean the Mahabharata. Indeed, a number of important scholars have made statements regarding the significance of this work. For example, the prominent University of Chicago Indiologist J.A.B. Van Buitenen, who rendered a highly respected, if incomplete, translation of the great epic, describes its influence as follows. Quote, "More than any other text in Indian civilization, the great epic has been the storehouse of ancient lore. Countless are the single references to epic material in the lyric literature. Such casual references show how familiar the Indian was with the events and the heroes of the epic, so familiar that they in effect become proverbial." End quote. Indeed, the Mahabharata is so celebrated that the various Indian arts, as well as books on grammar, poetry, astronomy, and so on, all assume common knowledge of its content. Wow. To take birth anywhere in that part of the world is to know this story and its characters practically from infancy. The great epic is a pillar of Indian civilization, and its cultural reference has been all-pervading. Sounds like it's kind of important. In the mid-20th century, at least if you want to understand where Vedic thought and, some of the culture comes from. Or not that it comes from that, but how it's influenced. In the mid-20th century, a major project was undertaken to collect and organize all the surviving manuscripts of the Mahabharata with the aim of discovering an original version of the text. The world's greatest Sanskritists, from India to Europe to North America, participated in this decades-long project. Wow. Finally producing what they called a critical edition. The project's chief editor was the eminent scholar V.S. Shuktankar. Here's what he had to say about the stature of the Mahabharata. Quote, "The preeminent importance of the epic is universally acknowledged. Next to the Vedas, it is the most valuable product of the entire literature of ancient India, so rich in notable works." My mouth's getting a little dry there. Excuse me. Venerable for its very antiquity, it is one of the most inspiring monuments of the world, and an inexhaustible mine for the investigation of religion, philosophy, law, custom, and political and social institutions of ancient India. End quote. Critical studies in Mahabharata. All right. I'm gonna, all right, at 15 minutes, I guess we could just cut out this bit, because I figured I would take a break, and I wanted to take a picture of this here.
Or if I don't take a break, I just want to get you water.
Okay. I filled my cup up with water, and then I ended up giving that cup to Shruti, so I forgot to bring one in. Okay. Continuing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'll read a couple more pages and I'll pass it. Okay. In other words, The cultural and spiritual influence of this ancient text cannot be overstated, and at its pinnacle stands the Bhagavad Gita, a brief section of 700 verses that appears in the Bhishma Parva, the epic's 6th book. The Gita is far and away the single most important text to come out of Indian civilization, essentially serving as that civilization's universal spiritual book. So what is the Mahabharata? First of all, it's an extremely large work, perhaps the largest epic text in the world. Of course, there is also the huge Tibetan narrative called the Geshar, which contains similar stories of kings and so on. However, it is comprised of a series of disparate oral traditions, leaving the Mahabharata to retain its title as the longest single coherent text ever composed. It contains around 100,000 verses. Holy crap. Almost 2 million words, and depending on your source, is somewhere between 7 and 10 times larger than the Iliad and the Odyssey combined. Bottom line, it is a very large work.
So Srimad Bhagavatam is 18,000, right? So that's so many verses.
Portions of the, a lot of the Bhagavatam stories are actually
in the Mahabharata.
The Mahabharata, and they kind of overlap with each other, but the Bhagavatam is 18,000. Mahabharata's 100,000. And even in, like, the one version of the Mahabharata I'm reading, it even says that, like, we only have a portion of the Mahabharata. Because there's many times where, like, they skip ahead in time and, like, they'll leave a year or two where it's kind of, like, assumed things were happening and they don't really go into it. But according to, they say that, the full Mahabharata is actually, like, 6 million verses. But those are contained, they're lost to humankind.
Yeah.
Over time. So what we have left is 100,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's intense.
Oh my god, yeah. Tell me about it. As to where the events of the Mahabharata take place, although the story's core happenings occur in northern India, as I previously mentioned, they stretch as far afield as Afghanistan in one direction and Burma in the other. Gandhari, for example, came from the Afghani city of Gandhara, today called Kandahar. I mean, that's like, several thousand miles. I mean, and traveling through, Anyway. A more difficult question concerns whether we can date the events of the great epic and determine whether or not they actually took place. As to establishing when these events occurred, attempts have been made to date the Mahabharata through archaeology, including metallurgy, philology, searching for references in texts that correlate to known history, and other such means. The results thus far have been inconclusive, with the most recent attempts setting the text's antiquity at around some 3,000 years, based upon these modern academic methods. Suffice it to say, however, that the dates derived by such methods are highly speculative and thus fundamentally unreliable. I did a little digging because I wanted to know, like, because we always say, 5,000 years ago Krishna appeared, and this was just what I found on the internet, digging according to, like, people that were, because they talk about, like, in the Bhagavatam, when Krishna appears, it mentions the constellations that were in the sky and what place they were in. Mm-hmm. So based on that, people tried to recreate the astronomical data. Yeah. And I think the year around roughly that these, through scientific methods, that they were claiming that Krishna was actually to have, appeared, given the information, was like the year 3228 BC. So about, like, that's, like, pretty huge.
Pretty much 5,000 years ago, yeah. I mean, that's a long time ago. Yeah. I read some article where they said they tested the metal that I guess they found what they thought to possibly be Dwarka, which is kind of like Atlantis if you think about it, the city that disappeared under the sea.
Like off the coast of India.
Right. So they're saying this is probably Dwarka, which is Krishna's city. However, I don't remember which article it was, so maybe it was just an article that I should have known was somewhat nonsensical. Mm-hmm. But I remember reading, and it seemed scientific, and maybe it was, I don't know. They were talking about how they were like trying to find out how old, like, oh, this is Dwarka, the ancient city off the coast of India, and to test to see how old it was, to see if what they'd heard lined up with what they heard about Dwarka and Krishna. They took a metal anchor they found in the remains of the city and tested it. And then in my mind, immediately, I'm like, why would you test an anchor of all things? It's one of the things that could totally have just sunk in there way later in time. And then they're like, yeah, not very old. Like, I forgot how many years they said it was old, but like, so not very old. And I'm like, that seems like the worst thing to test out of the entire city. Like, you just didn't want to find out how old it was. Yeah. Or, there's just like, there's a lack of thought there. Because the ship could have sunk with its anchor and you're testing that anchor.
Yeah, that doesn't seem...
I was like, okay. I stopped reading the article at that point. I was like, I don't know.
That doesn't sound very scientific.
No. Not common sense science, anyway.
Hey, guys, come drop an anchor over here.
We're going to test it. Say it's 100 years old.
Yeah. Jesus Christ. Okay. Suffice it to say how... Perhaps the most accurate indication of this ancient text age comes by way of a gentleman named Aryabhata. Aryabhata lived in India some 1,500 years ago. Oh yeah, not that long ago, just 1,500 years ago. And is considered one of the greatest astronomers of all time. He's also one of the creators of trigonometry. Wow.
Oh, interesting.
Anyone familiar with this branch of mathematics has likely heard of the terms sine and cosine. Yeah. Having flashbacks to high school. What they may not know is that these terms are actually mistranscriptions of the Sanskrit terms gya and kotigya, which comes from Aryabhata. As for his astronomical calculations, tracking the movements of the planets and so on, these were so precise that they were used during the Golden Age of Islam and eventually translated into Latin as the Toledo Tables, the most accurate tools employed by European astronomy for many centuries. His ground, and this is way before they even had telescopes, right?
Right.
Okay. I have to say this, one of my guilty pleasures, not that I watch all that much TV, recently, but I will occasionally watch Ancient Aliens. And I don't watch it because I'm just like, yes, the aliens. It's like, I like the history aspect of it because they show all these really ancient places, which not a lot of other people really talk about or you don't get to see footage of. And this guy, right, they were showing some city in Peru, I think. Not Machu Picchu, it was a different one. And they had these stones that were there 50 tons. And these stones, they look, when you see them, they're massive. They're bigger than our cars. And they are smooth as glass almost. And they're set together and cut at laser cut, super, super fine. You can't even stick a human hair between them, right? And they're just sitting there, but we don't know how they could have done this back then with how primitive they were. Clearly they weren't primitive if they were able to do these things. Just because you can't see how they did it. We look at the ancient times through the lens of nowadays, and we think we're so advanced. We have motor vehicles, we have cars, we have airplanes.
Yeah.
But you automatically assume just because more recently we came from
we were in a dark ages. We're not, but you don't know what was before the dark ages, how advanced they were.
Look at the Roman Empire thousands of years ago. I would argue that they didn't have motor vehicles, but if you're only equating progress with mechanical science, mechanical inventions, that's stupid. I mean, the Romans were they had, they had a very good grasp on anatomy and physiology. I mean, their doctors were actually quite legit. They,
but even before the Romans, they had a lot more sophisticated. That was at the end. That was at the end of that age. They were already heading towards the dark ages.
Yeah, they were already kind of. Look at the Greek Empire, Alexander the Great. I mean, India. The British come there, and the British think, "Oh yeah, we're so advanced," but you know, okay, you have guns and you have cannons and ships, but like your advancement is in destruction, not in culturing and cultivating higher knowledge.
Yeah.
So just because people live simply, you equate them with being barbarians. But who's more barbaric? The way we live today, slaughtering animals by the millions, like being heartless to each other, starting wars over oil and, you know, food and water. Like, who's more barbaric? They were living peacefully and spending their time searching for higher knowledge. We're spending all of our time trying to be more comfortable, and we're burning the planet down around us. Like, I would say that we are by far more barbaric. But because of our ego, we think, oh, we're so advanced, we have smartphones, we can put, you know, satellites into space. But
well, our technology
why
has
do we
put
need all of those things.
Our technology has put the barbaric natures that are going on around us into the background. It's behind the curtain,
exactly,
so to speak.
Yeah, it's
nobody sees it, so you feel like it doesn't exist. It's out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, yeah, and really, yeah, no, it's really quite disgusting, actually. And just when he said that in that show, I was like, my God, the sheer hubris of us today to think that, oh, we know so much, we're like, it's really, it's cringy, man. Like, whatever. In Aryabhata's time, astrology was a very big thing. Oh, I'm sorry. The Toledo tables. Okay. His groundbreaking discoveries follow the typical path of ancient knowledge, from India to the Islamic world to Europe. And really, the Renaissance started, it was really due to inspiration coming from the Islamic world. So we really have India to thank for the Renaissance, because they brought it to, In other words, we're talking about a very bright guy. But how does all of this relate to the dating of the Mahabharata? In Aryabhata's time, astrology was a very big thing. And one of the main motivations for studying astronomy was to obtain better data for astrology. Interestingly, this was also true of Europe, where the greatest astronomers, people like Copernicus and even Galileo, were trying to do the same thing. This embarrassing little detail, of course, is conveniently left out of Western astronomy courses, because they don't want to give credit to the fact that, oh, they were 1,500 years ahead of our time.
Yeah.
Okay. Getting back to Aryabhata, the core of his dating method lies in the fact that many of the Mahabharata's key events come along with specific astronomical descriptions. The descriptions of Krishna's birth, for instance, contains details about the alignment of the stars. Okay, I already talked about that. At that time, as do many other occurrences, such as the Battle of Kurukshetra. Using astronomical calculations to fix dates was a common approach in ancient times. It wasn't only astrology, it was astronomy. And they also had the math to be able to do it.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Yep, they were barbaric, though. Oh. They would explain when things, I'm sorry, not barbaric. They were uncivilized. Primitive. They would explain when things happened by determining the month in which they occurred, the position of the stars, which asterism was in which lunar mansion, and so on.
I was going to say, I think part of it is that in these ancient cultures, they learned to work with, and they learned about the world and the universe, and like these astronomical and all these things, and like connected with that in a way of like figuring out how that tunes to us, how that affects us, how do we affect it, how does it all work together. Whereas now our advancements are in, what can we build on top of it? What can we do to push it to the side? How can we go through it? How can we burn it down? How can we blow it up? Like, it's all very, like, that's man-made, whereas they were, like, how do we interact with nature and utilize, which is a very different type of advancement. You can still say it's advancement of a kind, I suppose, because mechanically we are advancing, technology we're advancing, but it's not overall advancement if we're also destroying a lot of the things around us, and if we're leaving that behind. If you were somehow doing both, if you were able to maintain both, then I'm sure you could find a nice way to make it all work. But we're not doing both.
Yeah, no, you're totally right.
Scale.
So we're going to advance in this area, but we're going to neglect all of this knowledge that we have. That's not advancement, that's ignorance.
Right.
You're pursuing something else. And the thing is, I would say this, in regards to material advancement, which is what our society today is doing.
Yeah.
If we were doing it, and we were truly doing it for the right reasons, which would be ultimately to find happiness, true happiness, and to bring peace and equality to everybody, then I would say, yay, go for it.
Yeah.
But the fact that the evidence is before us, and you can argue it, you can deny it all you want, like, that's on you if you want to. But just look, use your intelligence and look. And I'm not saying you, but like just to anyone listening, like, look at what's going on. Look at the political strife. Look at the hatred going on, the division in society, black versus white, Christian versus Muslim, Hindu versus Jew, parent versus child, all of it. Like, what are we doing? I mean, clearly, our so-called advancement is not advancement. It's not bringing anyone equality. It's not bringing anyone justice. It's not bringing anyone happiness, true happiness. It's not bringing anyone peace of mind. So clearly, our pursuit of advancement is actually the cause of all of our distress. I mean, what's the war about in the Middle East? I mean, we're there at the end of the day for oil. Okay, why do we need oil if we were not using oil in production of stuff? So like it's all just dragging us down. Whereas this, or not just this, the teachings of Jesus, the teachings of Buddha, whatever, spiritual, metaphysical pursuit of knowledge is where you actually start to find happiness and peace.
Yeah.
So we're going to throw this away, say God doesn't exist because I don't want to believe in him. Okay, that's your choice. I'm not saying people have to believe in God, but like Hridayananda Swami says in that one lecture that we listened to, like, okay, if God doesn't exist, then that means no one knows everything. So how can you say he doesn't exist?
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I mean, you can say you don't know. You can say you don't
makes
know.
You happier, even if he doesn't exist. Why would you not do it? Because you're going to be happier. You're going to be treating other people with love and respect and compassion versus hatred, animosity, racism, and jealousy. Those are never going to make you happy.
No.
And it's mind-boggling. People want that. They want this quick fix. Oh, the dopamine rush, and that's not going to make you happy. Like, getting in touch with yourself is going to make me happy. Oh, look, there's a buck over there.
Yeah, there's so many deer out here. Yeah.
Just chilling.
There's so many. There was one with like 8 points, I think, out there yesterday.
Okay.
Pretty cool.
I will let you read. Sorry, I had to go on that freaking rant. It just bugs the crap out of me, dude.
Right here. Okay. So about 1,500 years ago, Aryabhat went through the Mahabharata's various astronomical descriptions, making calculations based upon his own highly accurate and respected methodologies. And by so doing, he was able to determine that all told, the events mentioned in the great epic took place approximately 5,100 years ago. Now, for various self-interested reasons, different generations of Western scholars didn't want to admit that this and other Sanskrit texts had been around that long. The question is, why? During the colonial period, the first generations of British and other European Orientalists, Indologists, and South Asian scholars were proselytizing Christians. Their mission was to basically ridicule and debunk Vedic culture while convincing the Indian population to convert to the, quote, only real religion, end quote. Europeans at that time believed that world history began with the events of the Garden of Eden, which they dated back to so many thousands of years. Then they traveled to India and suddenly discovered this very ancient civilization and body of texts that threatened to overturn all their biblical dates. To uphold their speculations about the Garden of Eden, they had no choice but to proclaim that the entirety of the Sanskrit literature was more recent than the Bible.
Sounds very scientific.
Yeah.
No, I'm not knocking the Bible either, because like I believe in that as well. Like that's, I believe that there is fact behind. Maybe some of it may be exaggerated. Who knows, or change over time. I understand that, but like, I have just as much respect for Jesus as I do for Vyasadeva. I don't understand why people can't appreciate two great cultures at once.
Well, it was like I was telling you about the conversation I had at work. I'll briefly say it here. When I was talking to somebody about because they were surprised to hear that I believe in Jesus Christ, because they assumed that I didn't. And I said, yeah, I believe in Jesus Christ. And they're like, well, how can you believe in Jesus Christ if you're not a Christian? And I was like, because I believe he's a son of God, just like he said. He's like, I'm the son of God. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's just like when we're children. If God's the father and we're the children, at different ages, as you have a child who is 3 or 4, and they begin to understand you, you give them very simple instruction.
Yeah.
You tell them this, that, no, this, yes. You explain to them. They learn how to speak a little bit. You have those types of interactions. As they get older, you begin to give them more and more and more instruction. Now, I don't know. I'm not saying it went exactly like that, because it seems like our ancient civilization was actually very in touch with those types of things. But basically what I'm saying is that at different ages, you get different instructions from your parents. Based on the age you're at, based on what's happening for you in your life, and based on what's going on in the world around you. You get told, don't take candy from strangers. You get told these different things. So just like that, God has sent us messages at different times, at different ages, and amongst different things happening in the world to try to help the world not just fall into misery completely. Amen. And these are the people that he sent. And then instead of realizing, and just like how a younger brother and older brother get into fights over because the older brother gets to stay out late and the younger brother thinks it's not fair or whatever, you know, we decided, oh, you got a different message than me? Grab my weapons, let's go. It's like, no, it's just a different, it was a different time, place, circumstance, and they brought a different message to a different part of the world. It doesn't mean it didn't all come from God.
Yeah.
And of course, there are some very shady people that create like cults and things like that. That's a very different thing. There's, of course, like with everything.
But that doesn't mean the original
but
message.
This is why this is saying that you should study, you should find out. You should ask questions. You should get into it and see if it holds up. Not just like, oh, you said so, so yes, I believe. Like, that's not...
Yeah, that's my biggest problem with... And I know many... I'm sorry if it sounds like we beat up on... Not beat up on Christianity, but I just am... You know, I do have friends that are Jewish and Muslim as well from, like, the military, but I'm more familiar with Christianity because my mom and dad's family are Christian. And so, you know, I'm quite familiar with it. I've read the Bible. But I think one of the problems that I find, and I find this in ISKCON, in Christianity, any religion, but you have people that are fanatical. They just take it, oh, so-and-so said this, therefore I must do it. But they don't understand... Like, they don't try to understand. There's supposed to be intelligence behind it.
There's supposed to be intelligence behind it.
Use your intelligence. Why did Jesus say this pertaining to this person in this situation?
All right.
Like, you can't just take one thing out of context and then use it as an excuse to kill people. That's fanaticism.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with a lot of the religions today, is it just people are not using their head. They're not using their common sense when it comes to taking the teachings from their holy books.
Right, they're not, and also you have to also know sometimes you may want to check multiple translations because people do translate things for their own good.
Yeah, of course.
You can't just trust that, you know, different kings at different times didn't decide they wanted the population to do different things. It's a known fact.
I mean, how many times
that they changed the Bible?
The church changed the Bible.
So it's just like you got to be careful, and certainly doesn't mean that Jesus Christ's message was bad. It means that people that came after him were flawed, just like we all are, and you have to be careful of that and not just trust blindly.
Well, the great thing is Jesus made it really easy. He told his disciples, you know, he gave his 2 commandments to his disciples. If you can do nothing else, if you just do these 2 things, you'll be a good Christian. But amazingly enough, you'll also be a good Jew, a good Muslim, and a good Hindu, and a good Bhakti-Yogi. Love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And if you understand that we are a spirit soul, then you would love everyone else as them being spirit souls. How hard is that? That's like the complete essence of Jesus' wisdom. Yeah. And people cannot understand that.
I mean, some people. I mean, some people totally get it. Yeah.
A lot of people don't.
So we need to get into this because we're less than halfway through setting the scene. So we got to setting the stage. Let's try to actually finish this today, and we're more than halfway through our time. So let's do this. Let's see. Is it dying?
Well, it will be soon. All right, I'll keep my trap shut.
Keep an eye on it. Don't change it out unless it actually dies. Just keep an eye on it, or unless you're about to start reading again. Okay. But until then, keep it because that might actually last the whole time. All right. So, after the Christians, the next generations of Western scholars were more agnostic in their outlook, yet they also were motivated to maintain that the Mahabharata was a more recent work. To them, the existence of a 5,000-year-old Sanskrit text gave India far too much prestige, almost implying that India was the cradle of human civilization. There was just no way they would allow for that. If we had the time, we could hold a month-long seminar on the Indo-European issue alone. For now, suffice it to say that Aryabhata's findings about the antiquity of the Mahabharata have never gone down well in the West. Thus, you'll find various datings in Western scholarly literature that run counter to these findings. Really quick side note, don't want to get into a million things, but the fact that they took they took a lot of his teachings and utilized it as the basis for all their scientific understanding of the stars and such, but then decided this one thing, no. It's like, well, either it worked or it didn't work.
Yeah, you can't take one.
You can't build your entire thing on that foundation and then be like, no, that one thing, though, we're just going to pretend we're not even going to get into that equation.
Conveniently neglect it. Oh, God.
It's like, okay, so 5 plus 5 equals 10, 5 plus 10 equals 15, and 5 plus 20 equals 25. Well, we'll agree with all that except the last one. We're not doing 5 plus 20. Why not? It just, no, we don't like that. Like, it's just like, you can't just do that. If it works for the rest of it, it works for that.
I mean, that's how much of Western civilization has been built on that principle of cultural appropriation, and then we
leave what you don't want. Turning now to the Mahabharata's content, it can be said to take place on 3 different levels. On one level, it is the earthly struggle between cousin brothers within the great Kuru dynasty, representing the forces of good on one side and evil on the other. On another level, the text references a wider battle between godly avatars like Krishna and Vyas, and very powerful demonic beings who also descended to this world for reasons that we'll discuss later. For now, suffice it to say that when the events of the Mahabharata took place, both virtuous and villainous beings descended to earth and played significant roles in all that transpired. Thus, the great epic tells the story of an earthly dynastic struggle, as well as a struggle between good and evil forces in the universe, a battle of cosmic proportions.
Who needs Marvel's Avengers when you got Mahabharata, right?
Finally, largely due to the presence of the Gita, the Mahabharata transcends both earth and cosmos, pointing us toward an eternal spiritual reality beyond the temporary world. The Mahabharata takes place on all these levels, and we'll talk more about that in the days to come. To comprehend the actors and actions of the Mahabharata, we must first be able to understand the universe as portrayed in this work. The Mahabharata and other Sanskrit texts contain vivid descriptions of the universe, including the workings of time, space, and so on. They also explain the universe's demography, who lives where within various spheres, and the relations between these diverse groups. In comparing the Mahabharata's perspective with that of other ancient texts from Judeo-Christian to Egyptian to Greco-Roman, it can be said that the Mahabharata provides the most sophisticated, broad, and exhaustive depiction of them all. And since the great epic's narrative operates within the framework of this depiction, exploring its various dimensions should help us to approach the text. We can begin with time. Observing the movements of Earth, we see it turning on its axis and rotating around the sun, which also goes around in its own orbit. The seasons go in cycles. The moon goes in cycles. So do many other cosmic and natural phenomena. These observations led Vedic, Indo-European, and most Greco-Roman philosophers to conclude that the cycle is the essential cosmic motion, and to conceive of time as moving in cycles. In the Middle East, on the other hand, Hebrew, Christian, and Islamic theologians believe time to be linear, to extend sequentially along a straight line, meaning that at one point there's nothing, then there's something, and it just keeps going in one direction. By the early 19th century, this religiously based Middle Eastern concept had become the established view of most Western academics. This includes the modern sciences, which for all their anti-religious fervor have basically embraced the motion of linear time, an embrace that may be somewhat loosening at the cutting edges of 21st century cosmology. In any case, for ancient Indian civilization, as reflected in the Mahabharata and other Sanskrit works, time is cyclical, and there are great planetary and even universal seasons, or ages, known as yugas. This idea, by the way, can be found not only in Vedic literature, but also in the poems of Hesiod, who, after Homer, was the most important of ancient Greek writers.
If I may quick say a comment on that. So, do you know how, because I was reading Mahabharata Shruti last night. So on Earth, right, 1 year for us is the Earth going around the sun once, right? 1 heavenly year for, like, the demigods is, like, one day for them is equated to 1 year for us. So 360 of our years is 1 day for like Lord Indra, right? In their sphere of existence. And the thing is, science actually like props that up. Einstein's theory of relativity, right? So, and then Lord Brahma, for example, like, so Earth, our solar system is actually rotating around our galaxy, and when our solar system creates one entire rotation around the entire galaxy, which takes millions and millions of years, I think that is to be like 1 day of Lord Brahma. And the math kind of like checks out with whatever they put in. It's really fascinating that they even had the knowledge
to do that.
Not that they even had the knowledge. I don't mean like that, but like back then, without our modern stuff, that they were able to.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
According to the Sanskrit texts, the first age is known as Satya-yuga, the golden age of truth, the longest of the 4 yugas. Then follows Treta-yuga, Dwapara-yuga, and Kali-yuga, the dark age of discord, contention, and strife. In other words, the amazing age we live in today. The duration of each age is said to decline by a quarter, along with virtue, honesty, morality, and other positive features. The events of the Mahabharata take place at the end of Dwapara-yuga, the 3rd age. In fact, the great epic repeatedly tells that Kali-yuga began at the precise moment that Krishna left this world. In other words, Krishna's leaving us is the demarcation, the dividing line. Leaving us, that's not what he wrote. Krishna's leaving is the demarcation, the dividing line between the previous Dwapara Yuga and the present age of Kali, because Krishna never actually leaves. Yeah. In this connection, the Mahabharata and other Vedic texts describe the duration of the Yuga cycles and the entire universe itself in extremely vast terms, ultimately amounting to trillions and trillions of years. It's a gigantic, sweeping picture which includes descriptions of different time systems in different worlds and talk of time relativity long before Einstein. Time relativity long before Einstein. The Sanskrit literature explains, for example, that 1 year of time in the celestial world can amount to many years of time on Earth. So there's a notion of the relativity of time. And ultimately there's the notion that the soul, the eternal self, exists beyond the reach of time. In other words, the soul is not merely eternal in the sense of existing for endless material time, but actually exists in a system or on a plane that entirely transcends material time. Moreover, just as in most countries there are upper, middle, and lower class neighborhoods with different living conditions and facilities, the Sanskrit literature similarly mentions 3 divisions of worlds: upper, middle, and lower. Our planet, by the way, is considered a lower middle world, but with aspirations and sometimes putting on airs like geocentrism.
I love his humor.
Then there are the notions of samsara and karma, regular features of almost all Indian systems, including Buddhism and Jainism.
And they're also cyclical too, samsara and karma.
Samsara is the understanding that souls are not their bodies. The body is simply a covering for the soul, its vehicle. Or to use Krishna's Gita term, the body is vashamsi, simply clothes, something you wear like a wardrobe. The soul changes bodies just as we change clothes. We take on different forms of dress. That's samsara. And karma indicates that the process of transmigration is governed by a moral law. In other words, the transition from one body to another doesn't just happen whimsically or by chance. There is actually an ethical or moral law that directs the process, and that is the law of karma, another integral feature of this ancient civilization. Ultimately, however, the Mahabharata stresses one particular feature of Vedic civilization more than any other, the notion of dharma, perhaps the most important concept of the whole text. And because dharma is such a core concept, not only in Vedic but also in Buddhist culture, I'd like to spend the remainder of today's time talking about it. We can begin by defining the term. The Sanskrit language was conceived by ancient grammarians like the great Panini, whose work basically created the modern discipline of linguistics. Panini and all his colleagues and predecessors viewed Sanskrit as an organic language containing various verbal roots, roots of action that grow into words by adding stems, and thereby flowering in various semantic ways.
Such a beautiful language.
The dynamic root of dharma is dri, dh combined with the vowel ri, which means to hold, to sustain. Dr. For example, Krishna is famously named Giridhari because he held up Govardhan Hill as a child. Here the suffix dara, holder, comes from the same root as the word dharma, which means, among other things, that which is established or firm. This is a dictionary meaning, coming from the verbal root dri, and from that a practice, a customary observance, prescribed conduct, law. Here the word law is not to be taken in a mundane sense, because in a mundane sense there can be an unjust law. Dharma, however, cannot be unjust, since the Sanskrit word for unjust is adharma, literally not dharma. So dharma must be just. And
I
thus,
see it as when, like he says, law, you can't take it mundanely.
yeah,
I see it as it's no different than the law of gravity, the law
Yeah.
of time, the law. It's something that is irrefutable. It's
Right.
it's just the way it is, and there's there's no good or, it's
yeah. Well, it's important too, because they don't just have a word that means the opposite of just. They just say it's not just. So there's no mixing. It's not.
Yeah.
There's no gray area in between dharmic and undharmic.
it's
just,
either right or wrong.
right. Dharma, however, cannot be unjust, since the Sanskrit word for unjust is adharma, literally not dharma. So dharma must be just, and thus it actually refers to the sacred law governing the universe. The Greek word logos has some connection to the word dharma, and George Lucas is known to have studied this idea before creating Star Wars. In the iconic phrase, "May the Force be with you," the Force, in a sense, is dharma. So dharma is this force within the universe, or again, the law that governs the universe. For example, early in the Mahabharata, there is a powerful section in which Indra is talking to King Uparichara, who wants to ascend to heaven, and Indra is having some job security angst, believing that the king is doing severe austerities to usurp his post.
I love him so much. It's so funny.
Here it's interesting to note that the Sanskrit actually contains wonderful humor. People sometimes think that sacred texts must be stuffy old tomes, but there's actual incredible humor in the Mahabharata's language. Here, for example, the king's name is Uparichara Vasu, which literally means upwardly mobile Vasu. Apari means upward and Chara means mobile, so upwardly mobile. And Indra is trying to convince King Uparichara, just stay in your own position and I'll stay in mine. Let's not compete.
Hey, upwardly mobile Vasu, how about you be downwardly mobile Vasu? Stay there.
Similarly mobile, just stay where you are. Indra wants the king to remain on earth to protect and sustain Dharma, telling him Dharma rakshati rakshita himsata himsate. When Dharma is protected, it protects. When Dharma is injured, it injures. By the way, the word for injured in this verse is himsate, like himsa, violence, and ahimsa, nonviolence, and so on. The meaning of the above passage is clear. Dharma is this force within the universe, this divine law governing all things, and if you align yourself with that divine law, you will basically live an anxiety-free life and be protected by that system. It's similar in a good state. If you follow the law will protect you. If you injure the law will injure you. This can be understood in even broader terms. If you follow the law, you not only protect yourself both legally and socially, you also contribute, more generally, to a civil society. You contribute to the general peace by doing your duty, not speeding with your car, not cheating, and so on. That's the basic idea. Dharma is the divine law, and by observing that divine law, we contribute not only to our own well-being, but also to the peace and prosperity of the universe. So this is Dharma. And there are different types of Dharma as well. For example, there is Yuga Dharma, a particular duty for each particular age. That is especially effective and powerful in terms of bringing people to enlightenment. Concerning the Yuga Dharma, for our age of Kali, it's something we all just did, coming together and singing the holy names of God, accompanied by beautiful music and dance, or, in Sanskrit, Sankirtan. There is also, for example, Raja Dharma, royal Dharma, or Dharma for leaders, Stri Dharma, special duties for women, and Dana Dharma, rules governing the giving and receiving of charity, and perhaps most significantly, There is Varnashram Dharma, which applies to the entire society. Indeed, unless one understands Varnashram Dharma, it will be difficult to understand what's going on in the Mahabharata.
All right. So what is Varnashram Dharma? Man, I'm so happy we decided to read this. This has been like super inspiring. So what is Varnashram Dharma? Briefly, it's the division of human society into 4 varnas, or social divisions, and 4 ashramas, or stages of life. And this is like applicable to everyone if you so desire. Well, you're in these whether you like it or not, but you can progress through them if you so desire. Each of which has its own specific dharma. We can start with the 4 varnas, which are as follows. Brahmanas, teachers. Kshatriyas are the governors or the warriors. Vaishyas are the merchants and farmers, businessmen, whatever. And Shudras, workers and artisans. Interestingly, in the Bhagavad Gita, one's dharma is said, Interestingly, in the Bhagavad Gita, one's varna is said to be determined not by birth, but rather by one's own qualifications and nature. Okay, and varna is social division. Okay. So just because you're born into a Brahmana family does not make you a Brahmana.
So this idea that you should do what your dad did is not very solid in this day and age, at least.
Yeah. I mean, you can, exactly.
Like, you be a doctor because I was a doctor. That doesn't really...
That, of course, was the earlier system, which later became completely rigidified and thus somewhat oppressive. So,
When you used to be born in a family that did something, you had to do that. If you were a clan of warriors, you had to be a warrior.
Or I am a Brahmana because my family's a Brahmana, therefore you should respect me. It's like, no, man, if you don't have the qualities of it.
Yeah.
And thus somewhat oppressive, leading to nonviolent social revolutions, as in the case of Buddhism. Right? But that's another story. Unfortunately, over time, the system of Varnashram Dharma gradually morphed into the hereditary caste system we all know and loathe today. Yeah, I mean, sadly, India's definitely has succumbed to that. And I think that's probably part of the reason why people tend to, at a cursory glance of Vedic culture, they're like, nope, it's sexist. Nope, not. It's not right. It's oppressive. But
it's like just like anything earlier, taking it without the context.
Exactly.
You're just like doing like to the letter what's it said in one space, not understanding the overall meaning and intent,
the deeper meaning,
and all what was going on at the time that instruction was given.
Of course. In any case, that's the Varna part of the ancient system, as reflected in the Mahabharata. And then there are the 4 ashramas, or stages of life: brahmachari, young celibate students; grihastha, married with children and various household duties; vanaprastha, literally departing for the forest, means that once the kids are grown and all the duties of family life have wound down, the parents retire and dedicate their lives to the spiritual practices of their youth. So that's why it's very important to have a good education, so that later in your life you have you have a solid foundation to fall back on. And I'm so grateful that we were lucky enough to receive that, with the aim of ultimate enlightenment. And finally, sannyasa, complete renunciation for those that are more spiritually advanced. And again, each varna and each ashram has its own dharma, prescribed duties, regulations, and rules. For example, there is Brahmana dharma, Kshatriya dharma, Sannyasa dharma, and Grihastha dharma, and so on. But ultimately, I just want to make sure I have battery. But ultimately, we not only have dharmas that guide behavior according to body type, be it male, female, king, poet, farmer, scholar, married, renounced, and so on. There is also a dharma of the soul. Ooh. Music intensifies. When we completely transcend the body and fully understand ourselves as eternal spiritual beings, then there is our eternal dharma, often referred to as Sanatana dharma. Sanatana means eternal or everlasting. So if we are souls, and that's the dharma. Once we understand that is the dharma that we should be pursuing, because it transcends just this one life. Excuse me. In the Bhagavad Gita, when discussing eternal dharma, Krishna uses the synonym shashvata instead. The Bhagavad Gita is the spiritual heart or essence of the Mahabharata, And the very first word spoken by Dhritarashtra in the first verse of the first chapter is Dharma. Dharma Kshetre, Kurukshetre, Samaveta, Yuyutsava. Dharma Kshetre, on the Dharma field. This very poignant, pregnant utterance starts the narrative. And then Kurukshetre, on the field of the Kurus, this great dynasty. Samaveta, having assembled. Yuyutsava, and desiring to fight. So Dhritarashtra is asking, having assembled there and being eager to fight, Mamaka, my own sons, and Pandavas Chaiva, and the Pandava brothers, Kim Akurvata Sanjaya, what did they do, Sanjaya? One interesting aside, the Sanskrit word yuyutsu, one who is eager to fight, went to the east as jujitsu, the name of a martial art. Yeah. In any case, well, you can tell by like the samurai culture. I mean, they were very influenced by
for sure, 100%.
Like dharmic duties of from India, heavily influenced. In any case, after this opening verse, the narrative of the Gita begins. Arjuna, a great warrior, gazes out over the Dharma field and decides he doesn't want to fight, even though he's one of the greatest warriors in the world. Prior to that, his brother was doing the Rajasuya sacrifice, which was a yagya, a fire sacrifice that could only be performed by the emperor of the world. And to be declared the emperor, you had to go pull an Alexander the Great and go literally conquer all these things, take tribute, and that tribute was then offered, but then distributed back to everybody. So even before this war, Arjuna went out years before and conquered all of these kings already. He's already done it once, and now he's like, this time for real, I'm going to have to kill him, so I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So like his reputation was, people were terrified, like, oh my God, Arjuna's on that side. Once we begin describing the events of the Mahabharata, you'll understand that the rulers Arjuna faced on the battlefield, his own cousin brothers, were actually up to a lot of very nasty things, including usurpation, thievery, and rape and murder. Actually, I want to say it was Shalva. One of them, he went and raped one of the wives of these other kings, and there were some really nasty dudes. Still facing his own kin on the battlefield, Arjuna became overwhelmed by sentiment and didn't want to fight. And while the other chapters of the Gita feature Bhagavan, Lord Krishna, as the speaker, this first chapter can be thought of as Arjuna's Gita, because Arjuna does most of the talking, and he uses the word Dharma a lot. In fact, Arjuna's basic argument is that the upcoming battle on the Dharma field will actually be bad for Dharma. If we fight, we will kill these warriors, and they all have wives and children. Who's going to take care of all these families? Everyone is going to fall into adharma, right? The kids are going to they're all going to be orphans. They're going to have no, solid male role models, right? And he's not wrong in what he's saying.
Yeah.
He wasn't looking at a big picture. So Arjuna's stance in the first chapter is framed in the terms of Dharma. The war isn't good for Dharma and thus should not be fought. Of course, Krishna will counter Arjuna's argument by saying, hello, this is actually a Dharma. Hello, this is actually a Dharma Yuddha, a righteous battle. This is all about Dharma. Finally, in the second chapter, after presenting all of his arguments about Dharma and right before Krishna begins his teachings, amazingly, Arjuna says, Karpanya dosha pahatasvabhaya prichami tam dharma samudha cheta. Right now, I haven't got the slightest idea about my dharma because cheta, my mind, my consciousness, is dharma samudha, completely baffled about my duty. So the first spoken word of the Gita is dharma, and Arjuna frames his arguments against the battle in terms of dharma. Then, after all of that, Arjuna says, I really don't know what I'm talking about. I'm actually bewildered about Dharma. So Krishna will explain Arjuna's Dharma, what he's really supposed to do. Then in chapter 4, Krishna explains why he has descended to this world, and in so doing, speaks one of the most famous verses in Hinduism. Anyone that has ever spoken to an Indian audience knows that as soon as this Sanskrit verse is recited, everyone joins in, because they all know it by heart. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyutanam adharmasya taratmanam srijanyaham. Whenever there is a dharmasya glani, a collapse or a deterioration of dharma, and abhutanam, literally an aggressive rise of adharma or irreligion, tadatmanam srijamyaham, then I, Krishna, manifest myself. I wish you could just come down here right now. Come on, save us from this 2020. So Krishna tells that it's the waning or collapse of dharma and the rising of adharma that brings him to this world.
Let's stop there.
Okay.
Because I think both of us need to get going because we both have things to do this morning, and we're over an hour now, so we're an hour and 5 minutes or so. So thank you guys, everybody. We'll wrap up this and get into chapter 1 for the next week's episode.
Oh, yeah.
We're not very far away.
Yeah, a couple pages
just like
left.
4 pages left. So
Woo.
Thank you guys very much. And, of course, as always, let us know and share us with a friend if you think they would like it. And follow or subscribe depending on where you're watching or hearing this. Thank you.
Dislike us.
Yeah.
I don't care.
That's an option.
All right.